Well, good morning, everybody. You'll see that I've just come round with a big piece of flip chart paper and some post-it notes. That's for later on in the session. All right, we've got a couple of tasks we're going to do. What I'm going to ask you to do at that point in time is you're going to tear that piece of flip chart paper in half. All right, and you'll use half for one activity and half for the other activity. Okay, so you don't need to do that now. You can do it then. Just put it to one side. What we're going to do today is we're looking at our final module on the Catalyzing Leaders training course for you guys this year. So it is care and power in leadership. All right, this is the module that we find really makes a lot of people think about their situation and how biblically a more care-driven approach to leadership practice could be an option. Yeah. So by the end of this module, I would like to think that you will be able to show evidence in your leadership practice of a care-driven use of power. All right? Now, to do that, we have to start off by actually understanding what power is. That's going to be this first session, really. What is power? All right? We're then, as we go through that, we'll find that power comes in many forms. And what we've got to do, and this is really the task that you're looking at, is how do we evaluate power in our context? There's different forms of power. In Nigeria, which forms of power are more prominent than others? That's basically what I want us to be thinking about by the close of this session. Now, you remember this diagram. Every time I've stepped up here, I've gone back to it because we are talking about leadership. And at the heart, at the center of that leadership thing is this word power. What we have to do is we have to understand exactly what we mean by that and what impact that is having on those relationships when we're considering our role as emerging leaders. So power, very simple definition to start with. So this is where I'm coming from when I talk about power. It's the ability to control or direct others' behavior, actions or decisions. A friend of mine who teaches a lot on leadership talks about, basically she goes and says, look, power is pretty much influence. There's some people who would disagree with her. I tend to look at it and go and say, yeah, if you want to understand power, really is your ability to influence other people. Now, power has tended to have a bit of a negative rap. When you look at some of the quotes that you can get off the internet, there's some really famous ones that stand out. This one's by a guy called Lord Acton, who went and said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. All right, so he didn't think very much of power. He very much looked at that and says, well, if you get power, you're pretty much in trouble. Here's another guy who comes out the States. Acton was out of the UK. Edward Abbey is out of the United States. Power is always dangerous. Power attracts the worst and corrupts the best. Yeah? Now, when you read that, you're looking at that thinking, well, he hasn't got a very positive view of power either. And then for a bit of fun on the last one, I've got this is the wife of a former president of the United States. This is a lady called Eleanor Roosevelt. She says, power corrupts, knowledge is power, study hard, be evil. Yeah? Again, you've got somebody who's been very influential and powerful. She was a formidable woman in her own right, Eleanor Roosevelt. And her view on things was, look, the more knowledge you get, the more powerful you'll be. So in other words, the more influence you can have over people. So go, study hard. If you study hard, your intention is clearly to be a really nasty piece of work. That's her basically joking a bit, all right? But at the root of that, there's a negativity, isn't there? So in all three of those quotes, you've seen a real negativity about power. Now, the problem with this is in the Christian world, Christians, certainly I would say in the West, they tend to sort of step back a bit from power. They get given the opportunity to step in and to have a position of authority and to take control of a situation, and they go, no, I'm going to just step back from that. I'm going to pour out myself like Jesus and take a back seat, and I'm going to let somebody else take power. Well, there's a problem with that, because if you step out of the space that you're meant to occupy, someone else is going to fill it. And who's that person going to be? Well, if it's not you, it's highly likely to be someone who is maybe corruptible. Maybe they've got other motives than you have in your head. So you're going, I want to be servant-hearted. I want to make sure that if I'm going to be, in a position, I'm going to be the least. Well, when you look at the early disciples, somebody like Peter, you see somebody who was told very clearly by Jesus that you're going to be the rock, and on you I'm going to build my church. In other words, you're going to have power and influence. But, as we've already heard this week, you're going to be a servant. And if you're going to be in that position, you need to understand how to be in that position and how to hold power. Because if you don't, then it's going to corrupt you. Yeah? And as we've seen through church history, when people get into positions of power and there is a lack of accountability and there is, should we say, a misunderstanding about how they can use that power, then you get crusades, you get inquisitions, you get Christians persecuting Christians. You just look at it and you just think, what is going on? And that is this whole thing around power. Do we take positions of power? Do we step back from them? And what I'm saying is we have to understand power in detail so that we can then step up into the positions of power and influence. We are wanting to be in leadership. Therefore, we are going to have power, the ability to impact and influence other people's lives. So what types of power are we dealing with? Now, on those post-it notes that I gave you, there should be at least 8 in that little stack. So what we've got here is we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 types of power in bold. And I'm going to very quickly run through these. What I'd like you to do is just note those down on those post-it notes. All right, and you can just stick them onto the piece of paper just to one side for the time being. I have given this to Grace, so you can have this if you want to take this down in more detail. So, expert power. So, education, experience or expertise, that is a form of, as they say in brackets there, perceived power. Okay, because you have the knowledge, because you have the experience. I've worked in this business for 30 years. Therefore, you should listen to me and take my understanding. And what I do is if I've got a car mechanic who's telling me that, I let them work on my car. All right, because that's fine. I'll stand back. All right. Information power is access to or possession of useful information and control over its distribution. One of the biggest crimes on the internet is when people go and hack into a system and get hold of personal data. That's information, and that is extremely useful to someone who wants to go and, should we say, do some advertising campaign, and they want to get the algorithms set up. Well, if I've got all this information, I can do that much more effectively. So information is power. Referent power is attractiveness or kudos of interacting with the leader. I just think, there's somebody turns up, they're a bit of a celebrity, and everybody goes, oh, you watch it at a football game in the UK. You'll have Mohamed Salah turn up, and all the Liverpool fans are there, just like, oh, he's the Egyptian king. We've got to go. He's got power. He's got influence. Okay? Legitimate power. A perception that it's appropriate for the leader to make decisions due to the title, role, or position in an organisation. My CEO is Paul Williams. And there's this, I know who he is, and I know his role, and I know that when I refer to him, that he does have power over me because of a title that he's got. It's also because he's got a number of other things there. The reason he's got that position is because he is able to hold a lot of these power flows. Reward power, the leader's perceived ability to provide what others want. What does a politician do when they're trying to get elected? I can give you this. I'll reduce your taxes. Yeah? How about I'll make sure that we're going to sort out all the roadworks. Yeah? In 5 years, there won't be a single pothole in your roads. You're going to be richer. I can give you what you need. Reward. Okay? Connection power. Association of the leader with influential persons or networks. We've already had that this week. Networks are a very important thing when we're looking at power and influence. Coercive power. The leader's perceived ability to apply sanctions, punishments, or consequences for others' failure to perform. The best example I can give of this is from something like, from my context, from UK history, we had a king called Henry VIII. If you ticked him off, you lost your head, basically. Don't fancy my wife anymore. Got to find a way to get rid of her. This person's annoying me. Kill him off. Yeah, it's basically that I've got the power to do. I can just click my fingers. You're gone. Yeah. The person I think in the world at the minute, there's lots of people like this, but you look at someone like Vladimir Putin, and somebody annoys him, and the next thing they've had a little accident. They've fallen out of a window, or the plane that they're flying in has crashed. How did that happen? He has the ability to basically bring these types of incidents onto people, and they know that, so there is power over them. Ecological power, the leader having perceived control over the physical environment, the technology, organisation of the work. Okay? So power, when we sort of say it's this influence over people, their actions and their ideas and everything that's going on in their lives, it can be split down into these different types, these different forms. Now, what I want to know is, what was power like in the beginning? So when we look at this biblically, we'll go and say, okay, let's look back at creation. Now, this is the first task that I've got for you today. All right? I want you to look back, and I want you to go to Genesis 1 and 2, and I want you to go through the creation account. And I want you to look at the ways, or the different ways, that power was at work in creation. to give you a few questions. Who holds the power in the creation narrative? And if we think of those forms of power, well, how was that actually demonstrated or shown in that creation account? All right. Looking at time, I'm going to give you, let's say, 10 minutes just to read through and then to note down on half of that piece of paper how the power is at work in creation. All right? And then what I'm going to do is after that 10 minutes, I will come around the groups and I'll just see what we've got. All right? And then we can build a picture of power when it was seen as good. Yeah? Or in everything imperfect was very good, perfect here, creation as that. Well, power in that form must be worth looking at. So let's see what we've got in creation. All right? Off we go. 10 minutes.
Good morning. Okay, they are coming already. All right, good morning, everyone. Okay, on our table there, we're able to come up with these 7 powers. As we're able to come up with these 7 powers from Genesis chapter 1 to Genesis chapter 3. Although we have many places there that we have more of those powers. But in Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, please come together. In Genesis chapter...
guys, sorry, Genesis chapter 3 isn't on the menu here.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1 and 2.
Yeah,
3,
okay.
That's where we're not going.
Okay, Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, we're able to see legitimate power there. Legitimate power from in Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. The Bible says, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So the power of creation, the legitimate power, as written here, is perception that is appropriate for a leader to make decision due to title, role, or position in an organization or institution. To make decision. God made decision to create heaven and earth. In Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, we saw ecological power. Ecological power. Can please help us read, sir? Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. 1, 2. Yes. All right. Yeah, God saw that we need ecology, and if you read down, you see, He said, "Let there be grass, let there be fish in the ocean, and the like." So all those things put together is ecological power. God really see that we need those things to survive. And the third one is expert power. Genesis chapter 1 verse 3. Can you read, please? Genesis 1:3. Yes. Let there be light. It appears. So God said, let there be light. Expert power. God shows His expertise power. That He's expert in bringing light and light.
Thank you. That's great, guys. Well done. 3 really good ones there. We've got legitimate power. If you are looking for a title in Genesis 1, you have in the beginning God. God, Elohim, the creator God. Okay, there is nothing. Basically, if you go to Psalm 46, you are looking at this Elohim, creator, is the one who is to be worshipped amongst the nations, across the world. So it's very much, it's legitimate power because of title. Okay, we've got expert power. Clearly the creator knows what's going on with creation. And as we're looking at that, when we're looking at the sort of ecological element of things, well, when you're looking at the physical environment and everything that's been created, the balance, how it all fits together, the flow and the harmony of it, well, the power is with the creator. So Elohim is a really important thing here. God has the legitimate power as the creator of everything. Thank you very much. Second group, let's go.
Okay. Good morning. Okay, good morning. So basically, we came up with this tree and we got to realize that Genesis tree is not there. So we'll be starting with legitimate power. So legitimate power is a perception that is appropriate for a leader to make decision due to title, role, or position in an organization. So we checked Genesis chapter 1 and 2 when God was creating the world. He said, so he created heaven, earth, based on his perception that is appropriate to make decision. He makes decision regarding the creation of the earth. And also when it came to the creation of man and man, he said, come, let us make man together. So that's like a legitimate power, calling people to action and him deciding over how they should be made. And also we also looked at it in man, in the context of man. After God created the animals and everything, he brought them to man and he asked man to name them. We can see that in Genesis chapter 2, 19 to 20. And he told man that anything you name them, that is what they will be called. So man named the animal. So we can see that that's it's a perception that is appropriate for a leader to make decision due to his title, because God has given him that power to name animals. So we also look at ecological power. We check that in the context of man in Genesis chapter 1 verse 28, where God gave man the authority to dominate over the fishes of the earth, the birds, and every other thing. So we also look at coercive power, but we heard that it was not, Genesis 3 is not part of it, where after man disobeyed God, God punished man. So we can see that that is also another form of power. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We had an interesting addition there, that when we're looking at the whole thing of legitimate power, yes, we have Elohim, who's the king of all creation, but there is also legitimate power for humanity, who are given that position as stewards, to look after and to nurture creation and all the relationships within it. So we've got legitimate power given to humanity. It's bounded, that legitimacy, yeah, but there's legitimate power given to humanity. All right, so that was a really good addition there. That was good to know. It's well done. But there is another angle to that, which I'm hoping these guys are going to bring up. Out you come. I can see it on your paper, so I'm hoping you talk about it. I'll go back.
All right, good morning, everybody. All right, so the first power we have on our list here is ecological power. And just like we know, it says having control over the physical environment, technology, and the organization of the work. So yeah, we have who owns it. We said it is God and man. God in the sense that God is Lord over creation. He made everything. And we're saying man because when we look at the latter part of the definition, it says, and the organization of the work. So God gave man the authority to to create order. He told man, you had to name the animals, you had to take charge of the things in the Garden of Eden. And this we can see in Genesis 1 verse 1 to 31. For the second power, we have the reward power. And we said God owns the power. Reward power is when the leader has the ability to provide what others want. And as we all know, God created the garden and he made everything available for Adam and Eve. He said, this is it. This is the trees. You can eat anything except from the tree of good and evil. All right. Moving to the last one, we have legitimate power. He says a perception that is appropriate for the leader to make decisions due to title, role, or position. At this point, we're having a little bit of an argument, saying it's either going to be God or man. Because we are saying, yes, God has the final authority. But I think we decided to go with man in the sense that God gave man the authority to name the animals, and being in that position, having that title, man had the legitimate power to name the animals and take charge of what was in the garden. So that's why we decided to go with man. Thank you.
Ultimately, that legitimate power question you were wrestling with is what you're probably going to be starting to look at when it comes around to chapter 3. Yeah, because humanity look at God's power and God's position, God's legitimate place, and decides, I quite fancy that. But because we said that this legitimate role for humanity is bounded. Yeah? So they do have a legitimate role, they do have legitimate power, but it is bounded. God's omnipotence is a very different legitimacy when we're looking at things. I like the reward power recognition there, because what God does is God gifts something. There's a divine gift to humanity. It's not something that humanity's earned or deserves. God goes, here you go. I'm giving you a gift. And when you get given a gift, what do you usually, you have, oh, thank you. And there's this sort of thanks and worship in response because you've been given something. So there's very much a reward power that you could say is involved there as well. The divine gift to humanity is a big thing to recognize. Coming over to this group here.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, for our group, we we identified God, Elohim, as the ultimate source of power, but we decided to discuss the powers that were delegated unto man. The first power that we identified that was delegated to man by God is the information power. Of all the creations, we identified man as the only one that was able to enjoy communication flow with God. So we identified man as the custodian of information flow in the Garden of Eden. The second one is referent power. Also, it's related to the information power because God has identified man as the creation that he usually comes to commune with, to interact with. They enjoy each other's company. So God gave man referent power in the garden. And lastly, the common denominator amongst almost all of us is the ecological power, which God gave dominion to man over all the animals and other creatures in the garden.
Really good. Thank you. Just take it. There was one really good addition there to sort of stretch things a bit further. This thing here, this relationship between humanity and God, it's a really important thing. That is a special relationship. Yes, creation has the link with the Creator, but it is humanity has something made in the image of God. God walks with humanity in the garden. Yeah, that is a really important power link when we're considering things. Let's go back. Yep, so there is that sort of referent, as it were, of interacting with the leader. You can interact with God as humanity, all right, as his stewards. Last group, please.
All right, good morning, everyone. So we were able to highlight the power displayed in book of Genesis 1 and 2, and then we're able to, number one, shows that all power in heaven and on earth belongs to God. And that was displayed in Genesis chapter 1 that says, God said in the beginning, let's make heaven and the earth. So we saw a God who has all of the power and then is willing to distribute the power. And then we saw a bit of a chaos in Genesis 1 chapter 2. And that chaos was God's ability to sanction, which led us to what led to that chaos. We saw Lucifer trying to usurp authority, and then God casting him down, and then displaying his expertness in putting things to order again, displayed in Genesis 1 verse 3, where God began to say that, let light show forth, let this come forth. And then we saw ecological power, where God began to put things into places and gave the power to man to manage all that he has created. And then we saw reward power, where God made an helpmeet for man in Genesis chapter 2 verse 18. And that's all.
Thank you very much. Well done. Okay, it's one of there's a very famous comedian in the UK from many years back, and he was talking about how everything was perfect in creation for Adam, and then God created or brought into being Eve. And you've gone and said that's a reward. And I would go and say, yes, I look at my wife and she is a wonderful blessing to me. I cannot do what I do. I can't be here without her. Yeah? A lot of us do not recognize the reward of that, the blessing that we have of that partnership. All right? And that is part of the creation power that is there. We picked up a lot of really good stuff there. And you've seen that creation has power. There was one thing that I think that you mentioned, coercive. And we have a problem with the language of coercive. But please note that God goes and says, you can eat of this, you can eat of this, but you can't eat of that. So that, in a way, when you look at it, is the leader's ability to apply sanctions or consequences for others' failures to perform. You could look at that, and I've had this with other groups before, that they've gone and said, look, if humanity doesn't perform or doesn't do what they're meant to do, God can't let them step outside that. So as a leader, if you've got someone in your company, say, who's doing things that are just totally unacceptable, and you have to sack them, can you do that as a Christian? Well, yes, you should, because you've put these limits in power. They have a particular role. If they're stepping outside of that and they're not doing things right, then you have to bring in sanctions, control that as a leader. So coercive as a language we find problems with and we have difficulty with. But you can argue that back in creation, God basically said there's bounds to things and there's ways that we do things. And as a leader, you have to be prepared to go, I'm afraid you've stepped out of line a bit here. Maybe there's grace that can come in certain situations, but quite often you may just have to go, I'm afraid this is what happens in this situation, which we'll have with Professor Michael when we start to look how this all came to fall. But what I want to do just as we finish is that is creation, but how do these different powers look in Nigeria today? I'm not looking at the fall here. I'm just asking you, with those sticky notes and what we've picked up in relation to those different forms of power, we've seen creation and how it should be. So what forms of power dominate in Nigeria today. So you've got those post-its. What I want you to do is you should have one of these types of power on a post-it. So you should have 8 post-its. And I want you to order them with what you think is the most dominant form of this type of power at the top, and then take it down in order. So which do you think really dominates? And what I'm really interested in here is your top 3. What do you think are the 3 most dominant forms of power that you see in Nigeria today? Okay, so just stick those onto the second piece of paper in order. All right? So you have your piece of paper, you have your post-its. Where do they go? I'm going to go back to the list for you so that you can see them. How do you order those? So quickly, we've got maximum 5 minutes before I hand over to Professor Michael. I want you to stick those post-its onto your piece of paper. All right? So you've got another piece of paper there. Okay, what I'd like is if one person from the group can just bring up your bit of paper. We're going to have 5 of you up here. And we'll just see what we've got as our top 3 for each group. This is like a little bit of research for me, just to see where you think these forms of power are at play in your context. Yeah. So one person from each group with your piece of paper, and I can see what we've got. Okay, so I'm looking at top 3 here. So in this group here, we've got legitimate power, connection power, coercive power. Okay, connection, legitimate, information, ecological, not too sure. Okay, but we've got connection and legitimate there again. Connection, coercive, legitimate. It's coming up. We've got a pattern building here, haven't we? Yeah. Coercive, legitimate connection, reference. Okay, interesting. All right. Thank you very much. So, what we've done here is we've just gathered some of your feelings, some of your thinking about how these forms of power are at play in your country. And what you're coming out with are these different forms. Now, when we have the work that you're going to go through with Professor Michael, you're going to be looking at the fall of power. And you're going to be looking at how power can be redeemed. And ultimately, we want to look at how you are going to hold power and use power in the right way in your context. So knowing the forms of power that dominate are going to be important for you. All right? So these are not bad forms of power. The problem comes in how they're used. All right? Because we've seen legitimate power and connective types of things back in the creative order of things. But how are these used now in Nigeria? Thank you for doing that. That's interesting for me to see. I will take some pictures of those. So just keep them intact, and when we have a bit of a break, I'll come round and use my camera to take a little bit of a picture. I'm going to hand over to Professor Michael. Thank you very much.